Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to another live stream. Thank you so much for joining. And we are going to be going live, and we are looking at a very important topic. The Caribbean is under threat. Iran and Cuba tensions could spark disaster. Now, welcome back to another stream, and we are going to begin officially. And we want to make sure that you're hearing my live. So make sure that you're telling me if you're hearing the live, so that we can begin officially. Now, we're living in some very interesting times, and times in which we never probably would have imagined. Um, the matter of what is happening in Cuba and also what is unfolding in Iran is something that we've got to contemplate, and something that really boggles the mind. Why are we in so many wars when the world could do without wars? But it seems to me that our global elites, they want to control the show, and that is what they are doing. So, good evening, and we are off to a very serious question. Are, people in the world losing their minds over what is happening in the world? But we understand that very soon we are going to find ourselves in very, very strong economic problems and political instability in the Caribbean. And people in Jamaica, people in Trinidad, economists are calling for, economic instability because of what is happening in Iran. So we are hoping that very soon we will, see, some improvements in what is happening in the world. So far, we're not hearing that there's going to be any improvements. But we hope that very soon we will be able to look at to examine ourselves and make some improvements in our lives. Now, there's an article here that was written by Patrick Wood, and he is of course, a expert on technocracy. And he's saying the IMEG, Trump's war with Iran, is about global trade, period. That's what he's saying. He says, I wrote this white paper to lay bare the myths surrounding the war in Iran and to expose the master plan to restructure global trade routes in order to dominate world trade. This is technotic, what am I saying now? Tectonic shift in the geopolitical structure of the world. Further, this is the master plan for global technocracy, even down to making Gaza into the poster child for the technocratic state. So if you cannot connect the dots here, then you will be left in the fog of delusion. And this is what Patrick Wood, the editor of technocracy.news, is here suggesting. Now, what he's saying is that the India, Middle East, Europe Economic Corridor, that's the IMEC, is being called one of the largest and most ambitious infrastructure projects in modern history. Trump called it one of the greatest trade routes in all of history. So what they're trying to do is they're trying to see who is going to be able to dominate the trade routes of the world. The IMEC, and we said the India, Middle East, Europe Economic Corridor, that's what the IMEC stands for, is not just a trade route, it is a control corridor, a fully integrated system of rails, roads, shipping lanes, ports, fiber optic cables, energy pipelines, and data centers stretching from India to Europe. Whoever controls the architecture of that system controls the flow of goods, energy, data, and money across 3 continents. So that is precisely why technocrats want it, and precisely why you should understand what it is and who is building it. So this war on Iran is about that, or one of the agendas, I should say. IMEC, and remember the I stands for India, the M stands for Middle East, E for Europe, and C for Economic Corridor. is the commercial payoff of a decade of deliberate geopolitical engineering that runs directly through Jared Kushner. And Jared Kushner is the son-in-law of Donald J. Trump, the president of the United States. The Abraham Accords, the war with Iran, and the technocratic reconstruction of Gaza connect the dots, and the picture is unmistakable. So what we're seeing, we are witnessing as we speak now, a reorientation of global trade. And that is what the war is about. But we have always said on this platform that wars are profitable and all wars are built on economics. Who is going to win and how much money they are going to earn from the war. Now we must understand that wars are not in terms of who is going to win and who is, and who is a loser. Oftentimes the global elites are the winners and we are the losers. But we always think of it in terms of which country is going to win and what country is going to lose. And that is not how it is being played out, or wars have been played out. Agendas have been won. And obviously, even though agendas have been won, citizens are the ones who are ultimately losing. Right? And that is what we have to understand. That is why the war in Iran is going on right now. And they don't want it to stop. Now, this is what the article says. On September 9, 2023, the governments of India, the United States, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, France, Germany, Italy, and European Union signed a memorandum of understanding at the G20 summit in New Delhi. They called it the India, Middle East, Europe Economic Corridor. Now, this happened on September 9, 2023, 3 years ago, or 2.5 years ago. The official purpose to bolster economic development, enhance connectivity, and offer an alternative to both the Suez Canal and China's Belt and Road Initiative. So this is what you call it now, an option. This is something that they're doing to combat any competitiveness with the Western world. So we have India, we have the Middle East, we have East Europe Economic Corridor. So we are seeing there that this is nothing but just a trade deal, and the war is about to accomplish that. That is exactly what Trump desires. Now, there are reports like on Redacted. For those of you who watch the popular news and political commentary, Redacted with Clayton and Natalie, he posted a video in which he was interviewing a colonel, former colonel of the United States, and she was suggesting that this war is about profits, as the article here is suggesting. It's not about securing peace for the United States and securing democracy in the region, as we have been told. That is not what the war is about, right? The wars have always been to reshape the world in the way in which these globalists want the world to be reshaped in. Now, we are the ones who are always going to have to lose economically, politically, or rights will be curtailed, because right now we don't know what is going to happen, what's going to be the repercussions of this war. We don't know yet. And particularly those of us who live in the Caribbean, in the Americas, will Iran decide to launch attacks in the region? We don't know. Will drone attacks be launched? Will bombs be sent here to bomb us? We don't know. And how much also are our leaders involved or will be involved in some of these, tactics, like to bomb and stuff like, the government can do things that you and I don't know of, and then they blame others for doing them. All right, because they can say that Iran was the one who did when they perhaps were behind these terrorist attacks. So we have to be very, very careful of the news we're listening to, what conclusions we are drawing, what sides we are taking, because sometimes we want to side with someone, and it's human to want to be on a side, right? So we're saying that we're siding with the West, or we're siding with the Middle East, or we're siding with the BRICS nation. But who are behind these people are the questions that we need to be asking ourselves, right? Who funds these people? What are the organizations? What are the think tanks behind what is happening in the world? Now, there was an article that was written also in the Responsible Statecraft, some of which I wanted to share here. I created a video on it, which I have not yet published, but this was the Responsible Statecraft and the Vatican and Cuba, right? Vatican and Cuba relationship. And you are going to see here that a lot of time the actors, the real actors behind the scenes, are not the ones that we often see, right? The ones that we often see are the ones that the news media is telling us, but they're not the ones. So let me see if I can share my screen with you, and we are going to look at this article to see if we can make sense out of nonsense. Can I share the screen here? Where is my screensaver now? I think it should be here, and share a screen with you. Yeah, so we're going to look at this responsible statecraft and see what we can get from this article. But it says here, Vatican quietly steps up role in US-Cuba talks. This is what the article is saying here. It's saying as the Trump administration and its allies ramp up pressure on Havana following deadly bombing campaigns in Caracas and Tehran, an interlocutor that for decades has mediated turbulent US-Cuba ties is re-emerging as a potential facilitator of a bilateral deal, and that is the Vatican. On Thursday, Cuba's foreign ministry announced the release of 51 prisoners in anticipation of Holy Week, crediting the close and fluid relations between the Cuban state and the Vatican. The move came just days after Vatican Secretary of State Pietro Parolin said the Holy See had taken the necessary steps to ensure a negotiated solution between the two countries, and just over a week after Cuban Foreign Minister Bruno Rodriguez Parilla was received by Pope Leo XIV. These talks followed a recent meeting in Rome between a senior US diplomat and the Holy See's equivalent of a foreign minister. Now, listen to what it says. The news of a potential Vatican-mediated channel, which neither the US nor Cuba has officially confirmed. So they're hiding something from us. They're not officially confirming that they are meeting behind the scenes. Comes as President Trump has been floating a friendly takeover or not of Cuba. Meanwhile, as USA Today revealed, the White House is preparing a surprise economic deal with Cuba that could include a relaxation of restrictions on Americans' ability to travel to the island, as well as deals related to ports, energy, and tourism infrastructure. Limited sanctions relief is also reportedly on the table, according to the sources who spoke with USA Today. So behind the scenes, they are negotiating, and then suddenly attacks are made, and then we are plunged into a new world. What is interesting is that I remember quite clearly when Maduro was taken out of power, that the Vatican was also involved, and without the Vatican's help, then Maduro would not have been taken out of office. Now, when Maria Machado also wanted to return to Venezuela, she went to the Vatican, where she sought the counseling of the Pope, the current Pope there in the Vatican. And then she went to Trump, right? So you really wonder who controls whom, who is calling the shots behind the scenes. Because what we're seeing in the media, as I'm saying, what we're reading in ordinary newspapers and journals, these are often not the power brokers. But it's interesting to note that this paper was able to carry this very important piece of information to us. Now, listen to what they're saying. Cuban officials have emphasized their readiness to engage in a more formal setting. President Trump, for his part, says on a near daily basis that Secretary Rubio is talking to high-ranking Cuban leaders. So behind the scenes, they're talking. And then afterwards, you have an agreement is reached. At a recent summit in Florida, Trump told a group of heads of state that they are negotiating with Marco and myself and some others. Okay. Now, what is interesting is the fact that when we look at the whole, Cuban American, sort of um, relations, we have to look at the power brokers. From now, a Vatican led mediation may be the best off ramp for both governments to resolve their differences while keeping the well being of the Cuban people front and center. Okay? During the final days of the Biden administration, the Vatican helped facilitate an agreement that led to the release of 533 prisoners from Cuban jails, the removal of Cuba from the U.S. state-sponsored terrorism list, the elimination of a State Department Cuba restricted list, and the suspension of a provision in a 1996 law that allowed U.S. firms to sue in U.S. court any entity allegedly trafficking in property nationalized following the Cuban Revolution. So the Vatican played, look at how the Vatican is important, and we're not often hearing these things. The Vatican also played a key role in the Obama administration's secret negotiations with Cuba in 2013 and 14, secret negotiations. Okay, with Pope Francis in particular encouraging President Obama to pursue reconciliation with Havana and advance dialogue at the urging of two Catholic cardinals, Archbishop of Havana and Jaime Ortega, and Archbishop of Boston, Sean O'Malley. So Pope Francis's personal involvement helped break an impasse during those negotiations, and a U.S. official later said that a meeting at the Vatican coordinated by Secretary Parolin to finalize the breakthrough deal was fundamental in building confidence in both sides to overcome lingering distrust and sustain their respective ends of the bargain. All right. Now, in this article, let me stop sharing now. In this article, the writer also suggested that, let me see how I can stop here. Yeah, the writer also suggested that the U.S. Administration under Donald Trump wants the Castros to remain in power, or the Castro people, the family there, to remain. But they want the current president and perhaps his people, his colleagues, to leave the island. And that is exactly what they did in Venezuela. In Venezuela, the United States went down there, and we thought that they wanted regime change because they were against communism. But what did they do? The U.S. went to Venezuela, captured, kidnapped, whatever you want to call it, kidnapped the president and his wife, brought them back to the United States, right? And what did they do? They left the regime intact. So the fact is that the United States is not necessarily against communism. Is not necessarily against what is happening in Cuba or what is happening in Venezuela or what is happening in any country. What they want to do is total control. And if there's someone there in the regime that might not be necessarily, amenable to what they want, then they want that person out. And that is what we're seeing, or is not submissive to the agenda. Oftentimes, the agenda is not clearly stated because, as the article suggested, many of the negotiations are done in secret. They're done behind closed doors. So when we find ourselves in positions and we're taking sides and we say, oh, I'm on the side of Obama, I'm on the side of Castro and what he's doing there, we don't know what the real agenda is. We don't know what they are negotiating behind closed doors. So we have to watch. We ought not to take sides. We ought to be in the middle, as it were, watching, observing, and making sure that we remain objective. Because oftentimes, look at what is happening in Cuba right now. Do you think the governments are suffering? Do you think when the electricity goes and, they don't have any means of cooking and taking care of themselves and or delivering their babies, do you think that the leaders, the political leaders, the elites are actually suffering? No, right? The ordinary citizen is the one who is going to suffer. And you say here, Philip is saying here, Venezuela has socialist policies just like Denmark. Venezuela is not communism. Yeah, whatever it is. As I'm saying, it doesn't make it. Well, we call it names, But the United States is not interested in names of who is communism or who is, socialism. Because let me say something I've said on many of my videos. The military, the United States military practices communism. In fact, when you look at what is happening in the United States now, it is communism. What are they doing? They are transferring the wealth of the citizens from the poorest to the wealthiest. That is what Obama did. Bush did it also, and Obama did it when he came into power. What did he do? The same guys who caused the economic collapse in 2007, 2008, thereabout in the United States, when we had the Great Recession, as they called it, Obama went into power and he bailed them out. That is communism. Why? Because you're transferring the wealth from the poorest, our money, taxpayers' money, into what? Into the trust. When you look at the military-industrial complex in the United States, what is happening there? Who's really making money from these wars? Okay, the guys on Wall Street, the billionaires. They are the ones who are making, and who is paying for it? The ordinary man and woman who cannot afford the daily cost of living. Right? So when we're talking about socialism and communism, the United States is not holistically a capitalist nation as we think it is. Right? Capitalist for whom? Maybe for the ordinary citizen, but it's communism for the billionaires, because they're getting richer and richer every day by transferring the wealth from the least of us, from the poorest of us, to the upper echelons of society. And that is what we have to understand. So Thazi Maccabius is saying, as long as you agree with their agendas, they don't care. And that is what they don't care. They will work with you. And that is it. Let us stop putting labels on ourselves, whether you're black or you're white. And I'm not saying that these things don't exist. Socialism exists, and there are good aspects of socialism. Capitalism exists, and there are good aspects of capitalism. Nationalism exists. We Trinidadians, we are Barbadians, we're Jamaicans, we're Americans, we're all of, these things exist. However, what the global elites do, they use these titles to divide us. So Jamaicans against Trinidadians, Trinidadians against Barbadians, Americans against, Iranians, and so. And at the end of the day, yes, there are differences, but we can't allow our differences to divide us so that they can control us. And that's exactly what they're doing. So the same thing with economic models, the communism versus capitalism versus socialism. They're all good concepts. And as I've told you, I don't believe in any. I just believe that we should merge the good aspects of all of these economic models into one, whatever works for whatever country. So maybe capitalism works for X, maybe it doesn't work for Y, and that is how we should have our conversations. There are aspects of socialism which I agree with. People should have healthcare, should have basic rights of educating the populace, which we're not seeing in the United States. So the United States is taking away monies. When you read about what the United States military and the soldiers who sign up, the benefits that they get, and the sort of luxury that they live on these bases abroad, you should go there and see the luxury. And who is paying for that? Right? The United States citizens are paying for that. The taxpayers are paying for these people to go and unalive people, but they're living on luxurious military bases. So that's a form of socialism, communism, because the soldier, the army there, they get their health care, and all of that, all these benefits that they get. Okay, just to fight war, to participate in war. And that's why it's attractive to them, and they go there to fight. It's a business. But at the end of the day, who benefits? And that's what we always have to ask that question. Who benefits? Who benefits from the communism or socialism in Cuba? Who really benefits? The people, the majority of people are not benefiting from it. And you might say they have some health care, and we're saying yes, but healthcare can't feed you, and healthcare cannot replace your rights as a citizen. And that's what we have to understand. And some of us go there, yes, and we think what we see is happiness, but if we should live there, and if we only had that opportunity just to stay there where we can't be mobile, we would have a different conversation. We have to be careful of just going on vacation. I've seen many Americans going on vacation. They don't understand the country in which they're visiting, nothing about it. And they go home and they make all of these things. I've been to Jamaica, I've been to wherever, and they don't understand the dynamics of how things work. But they have all of this, little in their narrow understanding of the world. Okay, and sometimes we do that too. We visit countries, and because we are in our way, we have our resources, so we can afford to buy things. So when we go there, we say they're happy. But how can they be happy when they can't move? And they look at what is happening. Let us be realistic now, ladies and gentlemen. Even the medical program, which I am pro for the medical program, but when you look carefully at it, objectively at it, okay, these countries, the doctors are not, in charge of their salaries. Right? No, I am not suggesting that Andrew Holness or, Dr. Irfan Ali should have ended the program. I don't agree with that because they knew before and the United States pressured them to stop the program. However, we have to also examine the fact that these medical doctors are not as free as we would like. At least the Jamaican doctor who doesn't want to remain in Jamaica, or the Trinidadian doctor who doesn't want to remain in Trinidad, can go to the States, and Mrs. Kamla Purcell-Bessessor or Dr. Andrew Holness doesn't have anything to do with their salaries. They can go there free, and whatever salary that America desires to pay them, they accept it, and that's their money. Right? The Cuban government, on the other hand, controls whatever they get. And you might say, oh, yeah, because they have to, invest in healthcare. But how much do they invest in healthcare? You don't know. How much do they have as building their personal wealth? You and I don't know. Because Cuba is not a democratic state. It's not a state that is transparent. I mean, we are not too, but to some extent, we can find our way through, we can maneuver our way. We're not living in perfect freedom also, but a little bit better than what the people have to live in Cuba. All right, so let's be real now. We have Philly saying they also subsidize their top companies like Meta and Tesla. You're right, yet have problems when China and global South countries done so. Yes, the United States has a way of acting and behaving hypocritically. The United States, for example, trades with China, right? I remember in 2016, Andrew Holness of Jamaica wanted to, collaborate with the Chinese to have another telecommunication company in Jamaica, telephone company there. And the US said no. Another thing that he wanted to have done was to collaborate with the Chinese to build a new parliament in Jamaica. And the United States said no, right? Now, the United States is involved with China at the highest level, and they trade intelligence. You can think that they're not trading, but they are. And at the highest level, they are friendly. And that's another thing we've got to separate. We've got to separate what we're hearing in the media and at the highest echelon, how they behave, how they operate as elites. We've got to do that. As I told you that you in Venezuela, you had Delcy Rodriguez behaving as if she were, pro Maduro, right? And behind the scenes, she was there collaborating with Trump through Qatar to get President Maduro out, right? So at one level, you have this discourse, and at another, you have another discourse, the global elites discourse. Now, we've got to move away from the narrative of the global elites when they tell us that they are enemies and who really are the enemies. And as this lady on Redacted yesterday on Clay, I'm sorry I didn't bring that video here to bring aspects of it to you. But she said, very poignantly, the guest, Clayton's guest said that they always have to maintain an enemy. In order for the military-industrial complex to be operating, an enemy, whether real or imagined, and oftentimes they are imagined, they're not real enemies. And that's what you have to understand. These enemies are not real. Because if they are going to have, if Trump wants, let us say $500 billion, right? He will have to tell Congress why he wants it. And then he will say, okay, well, we have to fight a war against Iran or Iraq or, Libya. That is how it works, right? So even if they are not enemies, they have to pretend. They have to pretend as if they're enemies. And that is how it operates. But let me tell you something. All of this stock market is designed for wars. And notice when something happens, the stock market goes up or down and the oil prices goes up. It's manipulating our lives. They are manipulating our lives, and then they're causing us to be divided over who is the West and who is the East, and we're not on this side and on the other side. We ought to be very, very now wise as a serpent and harmless as a dove. And I'm not saying you can't call out some of the flaws of the United States, call them out. The flaws of but don't think that Cuba is righteous and the United States is ungodly. We need to get out of that box. We need to look at all of them together and look at their flaws and say that this is wrong, this is right, etc., etc., etc. Let's go on to another comment. So I wanted to participate. Here we have Philly saying, at the same time, you cannot have your boots on the neck of Cuba and then blame the victim. I don't have my boots on Cuba. In fact, I'm I've spoken out against what is happening with Cuba. I do not believe what they're doing is right. As I've suggested to you, Andrew Holness, Dr. Irfan Ali of Guyana, they knew that the doctors were being paid in the way they were being paid. Okay? They should have then dealt with it. They shouldn't have allowed the United States now to weaponize that Cuban weakness, because that's what they do, They use our weakness and they weaponize our weaknesses against us. For example, let us say we're all humans, right? And there might be something I did and I wanted to have been hidden to hold it in the closet, right? Let us say now I begin to talk out against something that one of them are doing, the elites are doing. Then they will come out and say, oh, that guy, Andrew, don't listen to him because he did this, he did that, right? And then they use my weakness, an error I had made in the past, against me so that they can weaken my position of calling out something that is wrong. Okay, so the same thing that they're doing with Cuba, right? Cuba has some wrongs. They have flaws, and we have to admit that. And there's nothing, I don't think anybody in the Caribbean, I don't think any country in the Caribbean would like to live as the Cubans are living. I don't think so. We would not like to live like that, in spite of the healthcare and the education, all of the pluses that they have. And these are pluses. But one thing I must say to you, there's nothing in this world like freedom. And even if you're living in a hut, even if you're living in hut, but you have the freedom of coming in and going out as you wish, it's better than somebody living in a palace who is not free. We have to understand that. And one of the flaws of the Cuban communist regime is that the people are just not free. They're not free to move as they should, as citizens should move. And who would like to live like that? You tell me. I don't think any of you would like to live like that. So let's be empathetic and look at the big picture. David is saying, in my view, democracy is not the best type of governance for young and emerging states. Socialism is. None of the developed countries of this world started as a democracy. None. Yeah, but we have to look also at what is happening. When we say socialism, are we saying democratic socialism? They have their titles. But when we look at the world in general, I don't know if, in spite of the flaws of the West, and the West has many flaws, right? We can see, I don't know if there's any other country, particularly the United States, which has said that all humans are free. The US has never practiced that, but it is the only country in the world, through its constitution, that says that all men are free. All societies have always believed that the king, right, the monarchy, is the entity that is superior to the people, and that all the citizens are only subjects, right? So you have the monarchs and you have their subjects. So I think that we ought not to throw out the baby with the bathwater. And I think that's what we're doing here. We have to look closely at history and see in history if there was any society where you can have a thriving middle class, or you just had the very wealthy and the ordinary people. All right. And I think that the West has provided us with that opportunity. Now, we are seeing where that is being eroded. And remember now that if the if we had not written constitutions that secured our freedoms, slavery would not have ended. Let me repeat that. If there were not very well written constitutions, very well crafted constitutions, as we had in the United States and in Jamaica, or wherever you were, in Great Britain rather, then slavery would have still been in operation. It would have been legal. But it was the only thing that they could say was that the Constitution said that all men were created equally. Okay, so that is what we need to educate ourselves about, and not just look at China or look at Russia. And one of the things I've always said, as Black people, could we live in Russia comfortably? Let us say we were moving there en masse. I'm not talking about one or two people who might be living there and surviving relatively well. I'm talking about masses of Black people. If we had decided today that we were going to go to China and call China our home, even Cuba. I remember when I went to Cuba in 1997, and I kid you not, that Black people weren't allowed, Black Cubans were not allowed to be in our surroundings. I was staying in a Hotel Vedado in Havana, and the Black people weren't allowed. And I've heard many other tourists who go to Cuba, and they talk about what happens there in Cuba. That Cuba also has a lot of racism, right? And Blacks can't do here, they can't go here, they can't go there. All right, so we ought to be very careful when they talk about rhetoric. And when you look also in the Cuban Congress, do you see a lot of Black people there? Well, my hue, probably Black in terms of what United States calls just a little, blood, and the person is Black, but they're mostly light-skinned Cubans and whites, right? You're not seeing a lot of Black Cubans in the Cuban Congress. So we have to be very, very careful when we listen to them about equality and whatever, because look here, it's not as equal as they say it is. But yes, we should respect also, and I respect what you're saying, David Maynard, we must respect each country's right to choose whatever path it wants to go on. So if Trinidad should wake up tomorrow and say that they want to join the communism bloc, they should be free. If their citizens decide that that is what they want to do, I believe in that, right? But we need to learn to respect each other. But at the same time, we must have conversations about what are the advantages, the disadvantages, the strong points, the weak points of these economic models, which I find very difficult to do, because we are so much caught up with one group and this group versus that group, and we're not going to be free, and the global elites are going to rule us. They're going to defeat us if we continue arguing like that. We have to look carefully at these systems and say, what are the high points? What are the low points? Marie's saying, sorry, no, you're quiet. You're still early. You're still early, Marie. And then we have, that is true. I have lived in Cuba. Yes. That it's not as free as we think it is. Okay. And many of these countries that talk about the equality of humans and whatever, they are not they don't believe it, what they're saying. But it's a way of trapping us into an ideology where many people think, because we are yearning for freedom, right? We're yearning for freedom, that they think we will join. I remember during, even when the days of the civil rights movement in the United States, many of these civil rights, people, they were, they leaned towards communism, right? But they understood that communism was not going to free them. Right? The communism was not going to free them, because one of the things about it is that at the heart of our problem right now is economics, and that is what Marcus Garvey recognized. Marcus Garvey recognized that, look here, white people or Europeans don't have to respect us. We don't, are we going to buy their respect? Marcus Garvey said, you know what happened? These people are not going to love you. They're not going to want to live with you. So what you have to do is organize yourselves where you become economically independent. And when you're economically independent, they have no other option but to respect you, right? But at the heart of the reason for which whites don't like us and other ethnic groups is because we're poor, right? It's because we're poor. If Jamaica, if the Caribbean at large were strong economically, there's no way the United States could just go and tell them to do whatever they want. They'll say, no, 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 no. We want to do this and we're going to do this. But because we're so economically dependent on the United States, that is why we have to do what we're told. Right? So it's not about just the economic model or ideology of having some people being educated. And I want to also discuss the matter of education. Education is not just going to school. So going to school, yes, the Cubans are allowed to go to school and they might be able to call words and all of that. But how much are they learning in terms of empowerment, being able to look at all sides of the picture? Can they talk against communism in their country? Are they allowed to even critique the administration there in Cuba? You know, if they're just conditioned into saying, just like Americans, that America is the best country in the world and there's no other country like the United States, that is conditioning, right? But at least the United States, you can have access to other information that might tell you that the United States is not necessarily the best country in the world, right? Even though many US citizens are conditioned that way. But in Cuba, you don't have any of that sort of opportunity to look another way. You don't. Right? So that's not freedom. That is also not education. It's what we call indoctrination. And there are aspects, don't get me wrong, we're all indoctrinated, and some things we have to be indoctrinated into, like in terms of our, the names of our parishes that we live in, the countries, capitals, right there. These are indoctrination. And it's good. Don't get me wrong. But we also have to learn to think. And even in my family, growing up in my family, there are things that I have to accept, as they might not be nice, but I have to accept them, that this, what my family did here was not the best. And I have to say, yeah, these traditions are not helping us to move forward. They're making us move backward. So this is what I'm saying. And Cuba doesn't have that. It cheapens the revolution. That is what it does. We have to make sure revolution should be education, right? Empowerment, ability to think, and even to challenge existing beliefs. That is what we need to do. Look at the revolution there in the United States. I'm sure the founding fathers did not believe in equality of all Americans. They didn't. But I think they had studied so much world powers that they had no other option but to say what they said. They didn't believe it, but they were truthful in the sense that, having studied, they wrote honestly, based on what they saw in history, that this is the best form of government. If we have any other inferior to it, this country is not going to survive. Okay? Now, let me tell you something. There's no perfect country in the world, and there will never be, because human beings are flawed. And if you look at our family, let us go to Trinidad. Let us go to other parts of the Guyana. And we see they're all Trinidadians, they're all Guyanese, right? But there are divisions there. Trinidadian, the Indo-Trinidadians and the Indo-Guyanese, right? And they're one nationality, they eat the same food, right? They share the same nationality. They're a family. But divisions within that family there are, right? In our own families, the Tucker family, whatever family you come from, there are divisions. The father might like the firstborn, hate the lastborn. So we are never going to live in a perfect world in which we have. And that family that you're looking at, the Trinidadian family, is pretty progressive. It's a pretty progressive country, in spite of the challenges, the ethnic challenge that they may have there. All right. So don't think for one moment that, we're going to come and we're going to face overnight, we're going to live in a perfect world. It's not going to happen here. Once we live in this world, we're going to have envies, we're going to have people who are going to make mistakes, and that is what you and I are required to do, to say, no, this is wrong. When the Indians in Trinidad, discriminate against blacks in Trinidad, it's wrong. And we should say that. But it doesn't mean, therefore, we should hate Trinidad because it's home, right? And it has some good points. But we call out that which the Trinidad or Jamaica or Guyana is not doing right. And people find it very difficult to do. I don't know why, because we're so blinded by nationalism, racism, and economic theories. We have Philly already saying, Russia is not fully socialism. It has little more social programs than the US, correct? It is not the same, right? It is not. Democracy in its current form has not worked for most former colonized countries. And that's what I'm saying, Philly. I want us to get rid of the titles. Just like I don't like this white-black narrative. Oh, he's white, he's black. That should be the last. I'm not saying you can't describe a person, because if the person is black, the person is black. The person is, But the fact that what I'm saying here, when we get so much obsessed with titles and which country is communist and which country is, my question is it working for the majority of the citizens, and who benefits? That is what we need to begin with. And if it is not benefiting the majority of the citizens of that country, if the reigning government are the ones who benefit the most, and then they tell us that we should, grin and bear it, then it needs to be changed. It needs to be changed, because we are not benefiting from it. But the Cuban, because why is it that the United States wants Castro family to remain in Cuba while they want the current president to leave? Why? Does that make any sense? Does that make any sense to you? Wasn't Castro and his family the so-called enemy of the United States? Because when we think about Cuba and communism, the first person that comes to mind is Fidel Castro, the late Fidel Castro and his family, Raul Castro, right? But the United States desires to work with them, but doesn't want to work with the current president of Cuba. Does that make any sense? So whatever they're doing, it doesn't make any sense. And that's why we have to wake up to see that this is more than beyond a Cuba and its communism regime, or communistic regime, or Venezuela and its socialist regime. It has much more layers to it that we have to study. So I'm showing you, I'm presenting to you behind the scenes the secret negotiations with the Vatican that Venezuela had, that Cuba is now having, and maybe other countries are having, that we just don't know, right? But we can't just rely and say, oh yeah, and the US is this and the Cuba is this, and then we take our stand and think that is the end of the game. We're not going to learn from that. We're not going to be able to move forward beyond this sort of division, this divisive sort of, and that's what they want to divide us, and that's how they conquer us, right? Now, what do you think about, let us ask some questions now. What do you think about the war on Iran? How is it going to affect us in the Caribbean region? Let me hear some of your thoughts. I'm seeing articles from Barbados, from Trinidad, in which they suggest, and from Jamaica too, that they are saying that the oil prices are going to be going up, and it's going to affect food prices, the cost of living daily. Do you think oil is going to go beyond $200 per barrel? If that is so, what about our dollar, our current currencies? How will that be depreciated? How is that going to impact our currency? Will we have starvation? Do you think that we might have a famine in the Caribbean? Are we producing so that we can be able to stock up on food? If anything, breaks out, that might close down, because at any given moment we can just have a lockdown of the supply chain. We're not getting any food to our supermarkets. How will we be able to survive if something like that should unfold? These are some of the questions that we should ask, because at this moment, ladies and gentlemen, we can't trust our leaders. We can't trust our leaders anymore. And I'm not saying you shouldn't respect them. I'm not saying that you should go and try to depose them. That is not my point here. My point is that we've been lied to. We've been lied to. And they say war is what? The first casualty of war is truth, right? The truth dies while war is being waged, because they have to lie. That is how the war is going to be effective, and they're going to be able to carry on with the war. And that's why I am saying to you that the war in Iran is not going to end anytime soon. All right? This is going to be a long war, and even if it dies down for a few months or so on, it is going to resurface, because the United States always has to have an enemy so that it can maintain the war machine. And that is why I think they don't want the Castro family to leave Cuba, because in their minds, they must always have something that somebody is an enemy and they're going to have to go after that person. And that's the only way they can justify war, by continuously, creating an enemy, real or imagined. Real or imagined. And that's what we're having right now in Iran and in Cuba. It should improve tourism in the Caribbean. I'm not a fan of the current Jamaica tourism model. I like the Singapore model with much inclusivity. Diversification is a must. And you're right. I think that they're already saying it's going to improve tourism because tourists probably who would go to some of these areas will be diverted to the Caribbean. However, again, the tourism funds are not necessarily going into our coffers. They're going into, again, the global elites. And a lot of these people, somebody was telling me about Butch Stewart of Jamaica and his connection with some of the American oligarchs, right? So some of our elites in the Caribbean, the oligarchs in the Caribbean, are connected to these war efforts, right? So they are also indirectly, causing these wars, profiting from these wars. So the tourists and all of these things, we are not going to benefit from it. Yeah, I'm not going to say now that a few of our workers might not be able to pick up some crumbs, right? To scavenge for some crumbs. But the fact of the matter is that at the end of the day, we as a collective are not going to benefit from just tourism, right? We're just not going to do it. It's not going to happen. Any other effect do you see? What about education? How is it going to affect our education? Already too, I saw this news coming out of Trinidad, which I reported on yesterday, about, Trinidadians going to the UK and having stayed there for a while, having stayed the time in which the visa allows them to stay, they apply for asylum status. Now, what do you think about that? But most importantly, Sean Sobers was suggesting that in order to mitigate that sort of the people who want to, who are searching for asylum, because he's saying that there are many of them who are seeking asylum, and some of them are involved in criminal activities. But what he's saying is that as of now, the Trinidadian authorities will be working along with UK authorities to ensure that every person that goes on a plane to the UK is going to be vetted, carefully vetted, to see what their motive for traveling is. Do you like that? Do you like the sound of that? And I understand that, there might be criminal elements who, as Sean Sobers is suggesting, that they are trying to escape responsibility from some of the crimes that they might have committed in Trinidad and Tobago. But the fact of the matter is, do you think you are comfortable with your government in your everything you do? I don't think. And how is it that the majority of the asylum seekers, have the criminal background? I don't believe in that. What do you think? Do you think that Sean Sobers is speaking the truth? Or is it that they are working on surveilling us and they're using criminality as a weapon, as a pretext to control and to surveil everything that we do? What do you think about that? I found that to be quite something that you need to think about, because if our governments are going to be looking at everything we do, including traveling, what about those who challenge the government? The government might not like that person. The person thinks that the government might have threatened the person, and they leave. They want to vacate. They want to exit the country, and the government is going to say, well, that person's a criminal. So we have to be careful of what we are seeing now, and some of the things that we are looking at in the news and hearing in the news are things that are going to be weightier. They're going to have weightier consequences that we have to be aware of, and not just think that this is happening because it's natural. It's not happening because it's not. It's happening because it's planned. And this is the difference now. Everything is carefully and masterfully crafted to suit the agenda that these global elites are actually working towards. All right, so let me hear from you. What do you think about the war in Iran? Do you think that it is going to have severe consequences? Let me hear some other responses for the Caribbean region. What about those who are living in Trinidad and Tobago, from Barbados, Jamaica? Let me hear what you're saying, Grenada. Let me hear from in the United States too, because we have the diaspora also in Canada, all around the world. What do you think? Do you think that that is going to be a major problem, or are we going to have lots of economic challenges, political challenges in the region? What do you think? Marie saying, I think that criminality is being used as a pretext. Absolutely. The intention is to achieve ridiculous levels of surveillance. Absolutely. That's exactly what is happening. Right? That's exactly what is happening, because everything now is criminality. It is just amazing. And we're not saying that, of course, that some of the people who are seeking asylum in the UK or whatever country, some of them might not have criminal backgrounds. That's that's logical to think that some of them will or do have. And we're not saying the government should not be trying to deal with that. But the fact of the matter is to punish every citizen, that if before you go on a plane, that you have to let them know what you're going about, and then they have to report it even before you land in that country, what you're really about. Right? That's not a free society. We're not living in a free world anymore. Right? And they're using the criminality as a way of surveillance, and it sounds logical because everybody wants to feel secure. We know that it's a problem. Right? We know that it's a problem. But can we allow our governments to take over our rights and to curtail our rights, inclusive of which is the right to freedom and to move wherever you want to go, without the government having to know, the purpose for which you're traveling? And I mean, you already stated when you're traveling anyway, but I think they want to get more information other than which you are placing on, and sometimes they will even provide the host country with information that you did not even place when you went on the plane, and they're asking you the purpose of travel. Okay, so we have to be careful now what governments are actually implementing. And even though we want crime and violence to be brought down to, and I want to say here too that crime and violence in a society that is so inequitable will never be eradicated. In a society that is also immoral, where people, people just are people, and some people are violent by nature. So no government, don't let any government fool you, will be able to eradicate. But what we're saying is we want them to bring it down to, levels that are not overwhelming us. Okay? It would be nice to eradicate, don't get me wrong. It would be nice to eradicate totally violence from our world, but that is not going to happen. Right? Because when you talk about violence, you're talking about morality, economic inequity, you're talking about so many, education, right? You're talking about even health and well-being. People talk about mental health, and some people with mental health will just go and just kill somebody because that person is suffering mentally, cognitively. Okay, so no government is going to be able, in this world in which we live, no human government is going to be able to eradicate drug trafficking, human trafficking, and all of the things that they say they want to eradicate. It's not going to happen. And any government that you hear making these pronouncements, you ought to be suspicious of that government, because you know that they know that it's impossible, and also that they sometimes are guilty and they participate in such and are worse than the citizens that they're claiming are criminals. And that's also another argument to mention. So we have to be very careful of what our governments are actually doing. Now, what do you think about the Summit of the Americas? I haven't spoken to you since then. Mrs. Kamala Person-Processor went to the Summit of the Americas with Trump in Florida, in Doral, Florida. What do you think about that? What did you think, and what are your impressions of that summit? And did she accomplish anything that you think is I'm talking Trinidadans now, that you think might be viable, tangible, I should say, any tangible gains that Mrs. Kamala Person-Processor obtained for Trinidad in that and Tobago in that meeting, in that summit with Trump and his administration. Let me hear what you think about that. What do you think about that? Anybody want to ask? Anybody want to respond? What do you think about the summit that Trump had in Florida? I'm not seeing a lot of interaction this afternoon. I normally have lots of more interactive people on the line. Want to hear from you. I don't have a guest today, so I want to hear more from you so that we can have this as an interactive engagement, right? Yeah, so let me hear what you think about the summit of the not the summit of Americas, the shields of the Americas. What they call it again? The shields of the summit, the American summit. Forgot the name right now. And that's a new summit that was had that Trump actually made up because he wanted to call all these right-wing the political leaders to the just to meet with him to talk about his role, America's role in the Western Hemisphere. What do you think about that meeting, or what did you think about the meeting? Let me hear from you. Nobody? Okay, so we have Marie saying one of the major points raised at the summit was the challenge posed by China. That's a very important question we need to, that is something that we have to look at right now. The fact that the United States is letting us know that they do not want China in the region. And we, whether we like it or not, had it not been for China, I don't know where a lot of us would have been. Like her or hate her, like China or hate China. China has been good in the sense that they have been able to fill the vacuum, right, that the United States left many years ago when they were so caught up in the war on terror, right? And China came here and did a lot of investment in the region, okay, whether in Trinidad and Jamaica, Barbados, St. Lucia, all over Caribbean countries, right? Dominica, we have seen where the Chinese have done a lot of investment. Now, what if they go? How will we be able to survive economically? Yes, you might say, well, the Chinese are not really developing us, but to some extent, they do provide some sort of economic assistance here and there, okay, which we ought to be grateful for. So how do you think we are going to be impacted with that if the Chinese should be asked to leave? How is that going to impact us as a region? The Summit of the Shield, right? The Summit of the Shield of the Americas, right? That's what the event was named by Trump. How do you think we are going to do that? Now, we can see already oil prices. We are seeing, let us look back at the war there on Iran. The oil prices we are seeing are going up too. And higher fuel costs is going to increase also the cost of electricity, which is going to increase the cost of production, which is going to ultimately increase the rise in the cost of living, which we are already complaining about. Now, do you understand that they said to us during the pandemic that they want to save lives and they want to do this and they want to do that? And then afterwards, a war was, between Russia and the Ukraine. And then we have seen other wars, the Venezuelan thing, the buildup to capture Nicolas Maduro. And now we're seeing the Iranian war, the U.S. Israel-Iranian war. Now, it was noteworthy that the Latin American countries that were not absolutely invited were Mexico, Colombia, and Brazil. And I think these countries are what you would call left-wing, countries. The Madam President of Mexico and Colombia, Petro, and is it Petro? Right. And we have Brazil, who is Da Silva. That these people are still of the old politics, the old left-wing, whatever is left of it, they still hold on to that, right? And Trump did not want to have any left-wing president there. But it's interesting though. Is it just about left wing though? Because when you look at Andrew Holness of Jamaica, he did not attend or he wasn't invited either. It was only Mrs. Person Besessor, and I think Andrew Holness is pro Trump. He might not say that as explicitly as Mrs. Kamala Person Besessor, but he is also pro Trump, and he wasn't invited. And can we think of any other right wing? I think the government of the Prime Minister of St. Lucia, if I'm not sure, is also not St. Lucia, but the St. Vincent and the Grenadines, St. Godwin, right? I think Godwin is also right wing. I think he's also a pro-Trump. I think he and Mrs. Person Besessor are in the same, boat in terms of their politics. So that's interesting. So it's interesting how Trump invited a number of these countries and left out some. But maybe he actually invited those which are the most important, right? And Trinidad definitely, with terms of its energy and energy oil-rich country, oil and gas-rich country, and Guyana, those two countries are perhaps the most important right now as far as foreign diplomatic relations and the control of the geopolitics, the geopolitical field is concerned. So I think that yes, I think that Trump did not call these people because he knows that he's always having problems with them because of their different philosophy and their different opinions. So he would definitely not invite Mexico or Colombia or Brazil. We've seen where all of these presidents have had problems with Trump, and they have been back and forth. Now, whether that those little problems and little squabbles here and there are real, sometimes we don't know if they're real. Sometimes they're just made up to occupy our minds and to keep us from seeing the real narrative, the true agenda, right? And they're dividing us with their little squabbles here and there, right? It doesn't mean that they don't have squabbles. They do, just like any of us. We do quarrel and have our arguments from time to time. But at the end of the day, we're not going to kill each other. So we have here Philly saying there were no infrastructure by Western countries. They were just taking resources and left us with debt. They are mad at China because it gave, well, I wouldn't say that there is none, but there are probably not as many as you're saying. Because I remember that in Jamaica, for example, that the French did build a highway. There are probably a couple of highways in Jamaica that the French built. But you're right, though, Philly, that the U.S. and the other Western countries could have done more for us in the Caribbean, because not only did we build their empire, we're not asking them to give us anything, because, when you think about what Great Britain did to all of the Caribbean countries, France also to Haiti and to Martinique and to Guadeloupe, right? And all of these major Western empires, they have benefited from us. So we're not really asking them for anything. We're asking them to give to us that which belongs to us. And then they made us become so indebted to them that we have to be paying all of these debt, loans, paying back these loans to them, and and they're charging astronomical, interest rates and all of that stuff. So you're right. I think that the Chinese, to some extent, have done something to improve. But we also cannot ignore that the Chinese also are getting a lot from us too, in terms of lands and primary properties and airports or ports in general. They're controlling that, and we should be concerned. These are things so we need to say again, we appreciate what the Chinese are doing, right? We appreciate what they're doing. At the same time, we have to be alert about what they're doing in terms of capturing main ports and lands, because the person who controls your ports controls the country, and we could lose our sovereignty. And we know how the Chinese behave. They're people, when they come there and they know that they think that they're in charge, they are not going to treat our citizens right. Don't believe that the Chinese themselves are not racist, because they are too, right? And when they control, and they can be nasty with it too. They're up in your face, right? So we have to be careful of that while we want partnerships, but we don't want domination, economic domination that these cultures and ethnic groups are doing. So the Chinese might not be much better than their Western people, because if they're getting our ports, buying up our ports, mainlands, okay, then we are going to be enslaved. So we have to watch, we have to be vigilant, which in many cases we are not, and stop listening to our governments and what they say, and all of these aggregates and how they have been beneficial to the economy. And yeah, but to the ordinary people, are they really? The Chinese is not your problem. More so, must go no more slavery. Well, the Chinese might not necessarily tell you that you're a slave and put you on plantation, but if they control the country and they control the entire economics, because ladies and gentlemen, let's not think that slavery is encompasses only having shackles and going to work on the plantation. We can live in our countries right now, which many of us in our respective countries are slaves, because we own nothing there. Nothing. If you live on a land and you control nothing, like the people in Jamaica, you're slaves. Right? You're slaves. Yes, you can move around and whatever, but who controls you? So you might not be calling them massa, and I think that is, we have to now put things into proper perspective. Philly saying everyone is biased towards their own people, except I will not let you fill in the blank. Well, I am not biased to anybody. I am looking at the society as a whole. And what I'm saying to you, I prefer no one. I prefer people who are able to stand up for what is right. Okay? And also who are honest, law abiding, and are not lacking in transparency. That is the people I stand up for. I don't stand up for people who are just posing to us and telling us what they're doing, just like the communists and the socialists. That everybody's equal, and in practice they're not. Okay, and this is what I'm here to say, that we can't just look at what people say. We have to look at what they do. Yeah. So we have James is saying here that you should listen to the Chinese national anthem. Yeah, might be great. Is it great? It might be a great. That the Jamaican national anthem is wonderful. I'm sure that the Trinidadian and the Barbadian, but are they living up to, that sort of standards, right? And the values, written in that national anthem, right? When you listen to the national anthem of Jamaica and the pledge, wow. I mean, mind-boggling, but it's when you look at what's happening in Jamaica, it's like, why are they even singing it? Then we have Seeley saying, when any so-called black people have money, pink, white people always steal our money and birthright. Yeah, but it's the only white people doing it, all right? Other people do it too. Indians do it, and Chinese do it, right? Because we also are not very smart people, if you should say. We're not smart. We like to think we're smart. We're smart in terms of going to school and just, living in society and whatever. But all we want to do is to party and just live and just vibes. Everything must be vibesy, right? And these people are busy trying to, cut up the entire world, divide the world and cutting up into pieces. And some people think, and we're always being left behind, because we're always taking sides and saying we are on this person's side, and nobody's on our side but ourselves. We must be on our own side. What's his name? Marcus Garvey wasn't telling us to love, Chinese. Well, he told us to love everybody, but he's telling us that we have to think about ourselves and our development. We have the Philly saying, I meant everyone look for their own. Yeah, you're right. I see what you're saying now, Philly. Yeah, we have to look out for our own, and that's what black people have to look out for their own. But let's not be also, if we're looking out for our own, it doesn't mean, therefore, that we should go and dig out the eyes of other people, because that is what the whites have done, and we criticize them. So we should criticize other people for doing that, whether it's us or it's Chinese or it's Indians. We should criticize them also for being unjust, unfair, racist, whatever word you want to choose. James is saying the captain of Burkina Faso showed black people how to do it. No more talking, just take a page and take a stand. Correct. And you're right. I think that it's now time for us to stop talking. And we are so much engaged in theories and who is a communist and who is a socialist. And yeah, we should not be concerned about titles. What we should be concerned about doing. If whatever we're doing works for the masses of people, call it whatever you want to call it. If it works for the masses of people, then that is what we need to have. If it's socialism, if it is communism, if it is capitalism, if it is androism, if it is philism, whatever you want to call it, whatever works for the masses, that is what we need to embrace. Then we have Seeley saying, say no to Manifest Destiny 2.0 and Pink White Supremacy 2.0. Yeah, but we also need to say to no to Chinese supremacy or Indian supremacy. Because when you go to Jamaica too, you see a lot of Indians in the tourist sector that have taken over that sector too, right? And black people are finding a way to, these different ethnic groups are now there taking over the island, right? And we are not saying anything about them, right? And many times, let me say this, and this is the irony of it, and I hope you're not offended because I'm not trying to offend anyone. A lot of times, the hatred that comes from these people, like the Chinese and the Indians towards black people, is worse than whites to blacks. Do you know that? Go to India or go to China, and sometimes, especially if you're there in a large group and they feel threatened by you, okay? And we know in India you have the caste system, and you have black people like you and I who are Indians who live there, right? And that they are at the bottom of the pile. And it was W.E. Du Bois which suggested that the Europeans got their, this color hierarchical structure from Europeans, the light-skinned people down to darker shades, right, from the Indians. All right, so let's not be fooled now by just looking at white people and Europeans. Anybody, including black people too, who are of lighter skin, who are lighter shade. Because look at Jamaica, for example, Barbados, and some of these countries. You have the shades of blackness, and the way in which some Jamaicans look down on the other Jamaicans, their fellow Jamaicans, those in the upper echelon society, the classism. All right, it's the same thing. So we can't just be obsessed with white people and what white people are doing, and when we are our own people, and that is when it hurts the most, because when a white person shows me racism, I'm not bothered by it. He's stupid, and I said he's not one of my people. I'm more bothered when a black person, right, shows me racism. Okay, because I said, my God, he's my brother, she's my sister. All right. So, and I'm thinking that a lot of where we are now in societies like in Jamaica and some of other Caribbean nations and even in Africa, that we ourselves, we are trying to keep down our own brothers and sisters. Philly saying, I heard Trinidad has big problems with the Indo-Trinidadians, absolutely, which Indians are about the same population as blacks, right? They're 50-50, right? So the fact of the matter is that we also have to look at the fact that it's not only white. And I'm seeing that sort of white and black sort of dichotomy come into the Caribbean. And I think we were a little bit more mature in terms of looking at people more than seeing them in terms of, Europeans versus Africans. I think that was more of a US sort of discussion, but it's coming to the Caribbean, and we are looking at everything happening through Western whites and blacks and whatever, and it's just much more nuanced than you're talking about. And I think we used to understand that it was nuanced. In the Caribbean, we used to understand that this is a nuanced subject. It's much more than black and white. We understand what is happening in the United States because they have lived, those two groups have been at each other from the beginning of the States, right? But in the Caribbean, we should be having a little bit more nuance, which we used to have conversation, that we're not, everything is white versus black and whatever, and that's not our reality. That's not our reality. That is a reality in the United States. It's not our reality in the Caribbean. We have minority whites, but the problems we're having in our society in the Caribbean, is racism and yes, colorism. That is for sure. And it doesn't matter if you're black or Indian or whatever, African, whatever. So we need to get back to our Caribbean reality and stop, copying from North America what they are dealing with, or Europe, their social reality. Okay, we need to attack our socioeconomic realities in the Caribbean, which we're not doing because everything that comes from the North, we just grab onto it. Every little word that comes, every expression, we grab onto it and think that it's our reality. It's not our reality. Anne Marie is saying, I want the government to criminalize it. If you go abroad and claim asylum or refugee status, you should be jailed. Why? Why do that, Annie? What about you? What if the government should accuse you of doing something, committing a crime which you did not? I mean, and you want to flee or whatever you did, you're protesting. Let's say you're protesting against the government, and the government says you're a criminal for doing that. And you decide to escape because the government may be looking for you, which some people have to face. In the Caribbean, we have lived peacefully for the most part. Yes, we have poverty here and people suffer in some cases. And we don't have extreme poverty too, because people always eat. All right, you might face some days of small whatever window of hunger, but we always find something to eat, a fruit or whatever, something from the ground. Right, we always have something to eat for the most part. So because we haven't faced like religious persecution, because even though we have our religious differences and all of that stuff, but we haven't faced those religious persecution where, you're Muslim or you're Christian and they're going to kill you. We don't have that in the Caribbean. We have our mosque and our churches, whatever, opposite to each other, and we go there and people are Adventists, they're Baptists, they're Pentecostals, and we argue, but we don't kill each other, right? Do we? So we have to be careful when we think about asylum, and thankfully, thanks to our political leaders, they have not been so dictatorial that we have had to flee, except for when Jamaica, for example, had the days of the Manley and the CIA, whatever, and Jamaicans had to flee. For the most part, or we have lived a relatively peaceful life. We have lived relatively peaceful lives here in the Caribbean. So let's be careful. You don't know the day, Anne-Marie, when you have to apply for asylum. And do you want the government to know that you're running? You're escaping from the government? I don't think you want that to happen. Yes, Philly is saying minority whites and others, but who really own the power? It will surprise you. Yeah, well, the minority whites own the power. And that is what it is. So even though we are a country, as you're saying, that is mostly black, but it's minority who hold the power. But at the same time, those who have been tasked with, because they're in the minority, and that's what we need to say, they are in the minority. The ones who have been tasked to rule over us, the faces of them that have been, and we're looking at, are the ones who are keeping us down. Right? And they are the ones who craft the laws and to keep us in our places. They're the ones who craft the laws to keep us into our places. Today I watched a video, right, of the NHT, the National Housing Trust in Jamaica, that was designed to build houses for poor people. Do you know that organization has become a private entity, billions of dollars, almost going to trillions, right? Owning in assets and whatever, money, probably cash. And it fails to do that, to build houses for ordinary poor Jamaicans. Yet the government is using it to do whatever it wants to do. Dr. Andrew Holness, who is coming from poverty, you should see his house, his mansion in Beverly Hills in Kingston. Right? So these are the people who are over us, and they are continuing to behave like the massa, like massa. And yet we adore them. We worship them. But if it were a white man, if Andrew Holness were a white man, you would say, oh, I'm a massa. Right? Yet still he's doing the same thing that a Mark Golding would do, that they call him a white man. But there's no difference between a Mark Golding and an Andrew Holness. Absolutely none. Just in what you probably call her. And he's saying, stop your lies. Trinidad has problems with racist people like you. Why do you say he's racist? He's not saying that anybody's racist. Did he say he was racist, Annie? I don't think that Philip said that anybody was racist. He's only saying that he understands that there are divisions between Indians and blacks. And then he said that minority whites and others, but who really own the power? It will surprise you. I don't think he's saying anything. Anybody is superior or not. I doubt you are a Trini anyway. A lot of your big comments about TNT that you know nothing about. But what is he saying, Annie? What is triggering you here? I don't think he said anything that was disrespectful. Let's be fair now to our colleagues, right? He said nothing. All he's saying, and you can correct him if he says something factual that is not factual, then correct him. So if he's saying that he understands. And he's not saying that he knows. He says he understands that there is racial tension in Trinidad between the Indo-Trinidadians and the Afro-Trinidadians. Is that true? Is he telling a lie? He's not saying that definitively. That's what he says he's learned. Then he's saying minority whites and others, but who really owns the power? I don't think anything is wrong with that statement. Okay, so yeah, so we have, and the people of TNT, yes, let us see, and the people of TNT are united. It is politicians. Okay, that's a different now. And that's what you can say. You can correct it by saying that. The people of TNT are united. It is politicians trying to divide both races. That's an acceptable point too. And that's what we're saying here to Annie. We have been saying that the world is not as disunited and problems with Muslim versus Christians. The politicians and the ones who like war are the ones who are dividing us. They're the ones dividing us, and to allow us to think that there are any great differences. I'm sure there are differences between Muslims and Christians and blacks and whites and all of that stuff. They're the ones dividing us. We can say about any other country, but it doesn't really, move away from the fact that there is a problem and we have to deal with it even amongst ourselves, because we have followed the politicians and we are living in their reality as opposed to the reality that bedevil us. Yes, Phil is saying that information I got from Trini is not sure if that's yes, Philly. I just think it's just a misunderstanding between you and Annie, because she's saying the same thing really. What she's saying is that the ordinary Trinidadian is not opposed to their fellow Indo-Trinidadian or Afro-Trinidadian. The politicians are the ones who are causing that divide, which is also true. All right, so both your statements are true, in fact. Then we have, I meant Andrew Holness, by the way, not you. Okay, I understand. Andrew Holness and all of them. Philly, I know you're pro PNP. you're PNP guy, right? I know that you have the tradition of the Michael Mann, and you think that the PNP is still in that sort of mode of operation, which I don't think. I think that sort of socialist ideology left the PNP after the 80s. So whether it is Dr. Andrew Holness or Mr. Mark Golding, they pretty much have the same sort of ideology, right? Because today I was saying to you that I was listening about the NHT, and both of them made a law in Parliament, in Jamaican Parliament, to suggest that the NHT funds can be used for anything the government deems necessary for it to be used for. So anything that they want to take out the taxpayers' money to do, whatever, paying for a football game or, paying for IMF loans, paying down on the debt, whatever they want to do, they don't have to ask you, because it's legal. The Supreme Court actually is supporting them in that effort. So whether it's Andrew Holness, and today I heard Mr. Golding saying, how can the government be taking money out of the NHT when they did the same thing with the IMF? Right, in I think it was 2013 or 2014. So this is what we're saying, that we have to be careful of the rhetoric being dispersed by our politicians, because they're not truthful. They're not honest. They're there to get our votes, and having received our votes, they move on. Right, guys, share the live, and share the live that others can come in, because the algorithm is, for some reason, is just holding back the videos. I bet they were Afro-Trinids. Yeah, well, the fact of the matter is that we're not here to say who is Afro-Trini from. We're talking about now uniting ourselves. So whether you're Afro-Trini or in fact, We grew up in the Caribbean just being called Trinidadians, right? You're Jamaican or you're Trinidadian. It doesn't matter if you're Chinese or or the only time you talk about Afro Trinidadians is when you're having a study and you want people to look at the demographics of the country, and you're saying you have the Indians, you have the Jews, you have the Chinese, you have all these people in Trinidad, right? And you specify all of these ethnic groups and racial groups that you begin. But people just call themselves they're Trinis, right? It's not like African American. We don't have that we don't have that Caribbean culture. We don't have these sort of hyphenated terminologies to define us. We are just Trinis, or we are Jamaicans, or we are Barbadians, or we are Antiguans, whoever we are. And he's saying maybe Indo-Trinis also think Trinidad has a big problem with us blacks. Yeah, all of us. And that's the whole thing about it, Andy, that we think we are not the problem. We always think that there's the other, right? And so that's why we need to come together, the people, and we need to look at each other's perspective and begin to respect. And that's how we can. And then, what flaws do we have on both sides, Afro Trinidadians and Indo Trinidadians? And then we can come and we can right our wrongs, and then we can live harmoniously. But I agree with you, Annie, that Trinidad doesn't have any great division. Just that we have, once we live as a family, even in our own families, and all of you can tell me that is true, we have divisions. We have divisions even within our own immediate families. There's hatred. The first one doesn't like the last one. You have the illegitimate children in the family, all of that stuff. So we know we will not always like each other, right? Even colorism in the family. I've had where people, you have lighter sisters and brother, they call you black. You're black and ugly. Right, and that is coming from the same family. So once you're living with human beings, we're going to have problems, conflicts. Let me say conflicts. Now we have, the longer the war on Iran continues, the likelier USA's invincible image would diminish. Just like the Europeans after World War II, the USA would be forced to leave us alone while licking its wounds. That's an interesting perspective, David Maynard, because you wonder if the United States thought that it was waning, if the military-industrial complex thought that they were not getting a lot of money from these wars by the sales of weapons, why would they continue it? Because this war was totally unnecessary. Right? We can probably say, oh, well, the other wars, you can say there probably might have been some justification, even though still deception, but this one was totally unnecessary. There was nothing that the Iranians did, right, that should have provoked Trump. Nothing they did. They said nothing. In fact, the Ayatollah did not even, in rhetoric, even Venezuela used to use a lot of rhetoric, right? You hear Nicolas Maduro saying things about Trump and whatever. But the Ayatollah was pretty much quiet. He was pretty much willing to have engaged the United States. So if they thought that their sales, because let us now make it very, very clear here, the US empire is going to eventually die, like all other empires. My point, though, I think the republic is what is dying. That is my argument that many people don't share. The republic, the democratic state of the US is dying. So very soon, all the liberties that you people have there is just not going to be there anymore, right? It's going to be like a full dictatorship. But the empire, to me, based on the amount of money that they're putting into it, seems to be getting stronger. That's what Trump just did in less than how many years? In less than 2 years, probably he's there for 2 years now. In less than 2 years that he is in the presidency is unthinkable. And could not have been accomplished by just a dying empire. I think perhaps they are at the apex of their power, and that is when they're at the apex of their power, as you're saying, and I agree with you, they are not very far from here. They are going to die, right? They're going to die. But I think now it's at its apex. But what would the Caribbean embrace freedom, or even American then? But what would the Caribbean? Yeah, well, the Caribbean is doing things because they're not embracing anything. The Caribbean is just doing what they're told. The Caribbean is not embracing anything here. They're just doing what Trump tells them to do. Nothing that they have no idea. Right now, the Caribbean doesn't even have an ideology. When have you heard anything coming out of universities that talk about any economic, theory or, whatever? We have nothing. We're dead here in the Caribbean. No, we're dead. We're just surviving. You're right. We're just surviving. We're just occupying space, as it were. We're not doing anything. Um, well, I must say, in Jamaica yesterday, I saw a protest, which was good. And we should have these things every day, of the people in Jamaica protesting against what Andrew Holness has done in ending the Cuban medical program. That was good. They were saying, what are we going to do now? These people used to, help us with our vision, and other the nurses, the doctors. That's good. We need to, up the pressure on our governments. Philly Ward is saying, actually, I am from a JLP area, but I am independent. Oh, good. Not in favor of any tribe. I love that, Philly. I personally in favor of a revolution based on policies, right? And I agree with you. Wholeness gives me overseer vibe, Jamaica. Last, you're correct, and we've lost the battle. But I don't think that any of them is going to change. There's nothing really revolutionary that that the other party is saying that should be done in Jamaica. Nothing. In fact, the laws that were passed for the NHT was a bilateral agreement in Parliament in which the government can pretty much do anything with the NHT funds, and the citizens have no rights, and they don't care, and well, they can't say anything. But what would the Caribbean embrace then? Freedom or America even then? I think, David, we're so small that we find ourselves in a very tight place. Because, over the years, really and truly, when we say we were independent, we never were. Right? We never had become independent. What happened is that we're so much connected to the Western economic and political infrastructure that we are dependent on them. So we are almost a part of them. And my theory, David, is that when we got our independence, or so-called independence from Great Britain, that it was not independence, it was just the UK rather, or England handing over its former colonies to the United States. But the United States did not want official colonies because they didn't want to take on the task of having to keep us alive like they do to Puerto Rico and other, and other of these Commonwealth countries. So, but we're on our own, but the United States controls us. So we are indirectly a part of the US empire, like it or not. We don't want to be as citizens, but that is what the local elites, they work together with the US empire. Yeah. So that's our thing. There's nothing that we can do. This war will change many things, especially as relatives to the control of oil and US dollar status. Trump said he thought he would not like Venezuela. Yeah. He thought he's stupid to think that the Iranian war would be like Venezuela, because we know that Iran, you're talking about Muslims here, and they're going to fight. Right? They're going to fight to death. He cannot stop the war, as Iran is saying no. He doesn't want to stop the war. That's what I'm saying. He doesn't want to stop the war. He's just giving us the illusion that the war could have been there for a few days or a few weeks and then stop. But they don't want to stop the war. The wars are profitable, and they're making hundreds of dollars while hundreds of millions of people are going to die. They're making huge sums of money, right? The United States does not want to stop wars, ladies and gentlemen. They want to expand on wars, because wars are what actually feed the empire. Without wars, there won't be an empire. And that is what the founding fathers said, that wars, of all the enemies that the United States could face, wars are the most potent, the most dangerous, the most lethal to freedom, right? And they know that, and they want to take away the freedoms from Americans and from the world at large. So the wars, for many reasons, help them to do so, right? So they don't want to stop the war. They want to expand it. Okay. What they talk about now, if you talk about losses or losses, is what the elites are losing. Are they losing something? Whatever. That's what we need to look at. But not in terms of wars, they love it. Oil prices will reach right $300 up. Talk about that too, the price of all the oil prices and how that is going to benefit them. Now, what I would like to know, if the price of oil goes up to 300, as you're saying, remembrance, sir, oil prices will reach $300 soon. This war is an amazing thing for Trinidad and Guyana. Open book TNT military and let this war go on as far as long as Iraq. You would want this war to go on, and because it's going to increase the oil prices and probably put some money in the kitty of Trinidad and Guyana. But who is it going? Who's going to benefit from the increase of oil? Who owns the oil? And that's what we have to understand. Who is going to be the owner of the oil and gas in Trinidad and also in Guyana? Or the people, the owner, who benefits? Again, we have to look at these questions, right? We can't just think in terms of what we hear on the media that, yeah, it's going to be beneficial to Trinidad, but for whom? All right, who benefits? They said independence were in name only and was morphed from colonization to neo-colonization. Absolutely, exactly so. No, there's no other way to, and we should see that right now, that we are not independent. We should see that we're not sovereign states. We believe we were, but we are not. Right, and that is what this war, the one with Venezuela, the buildup of Nicolas Maduro, and this war with Iran and others, we should know by now that we are not independent sovereign states. Right? Please like the live and make sure you're sharing the live, that others will join and be a part of this very interesting, enlightening conversation, right? Because we need to have these conversations going. Now, look at the global economic instability that we are having as a result of the war. Markets react quickly to war. Uncertainty spreads. Inflation increases worldwide, which we're seeing right now. Higher import prices, pressure on already fragile economies, and tourism could decline if global travel slows. And that's another thing. We are saying that tourism will improve in the Caribbean, but it also could slow. Because if Americans, for example, that we get a lot of our patrons from the United States, if they should feel that the economic infrastructure is unstable, they may not travel. And even in Europe, right? So we also have to be careful. Tourism could plunge as a result of this war on Iran if it continues without any sort of pause. The U.S. military escalation. We're hearing that Trump is suggesting that he might be sending soldiers on the ground. So that could be a big confrontation. Okay, more military activity in surrounding waters. We could see political pressure on Caribbean governments to take sides. I saw this video, which I thought could have been a misinformation video, but it's something to think about. The video was suggesting that the U.S. government, that's Trump, wants to pressure some Caribbean countries to enlist some of their men, maybe so, and women too. I don't know if we want some of their men as soldiers to be used as combat soldiers. What if that happens? Like in World War II, where some of the colonies had to send soldiers to help Great Britain in fighting its wars. What if that happens? Right? Here in the Caribbean, something to look at. And those of you who live in the United States, if you have children, what if they should? I think that there is news now, this is really true, that the Trump administration is contemplating of going back to the days when it was compulsory, it was mandatory to have to go to enlist, to be enlisted in the army. So that could also happen there. All right. So these are repercussions that we have to look at and we have to be careful about. I'm speaking only of the people who claim to be refugees or asylees who are not. Okay, yeah, I see what you're saying. Yeah, so we have to look carefully at these things. We have geopolitical tensions could spread. Iran is connected to Russia, China. right? And the regional allies such as Hezbollah. And I was hoping that Mrs. Kamala Person would have not made statements like what she made about, Trinidad supporting Iran, because that could be dangerous for Trinidadians and Tobagonians in terms of creating enemies, right? Remember now that an enemy looks at a country as a perceived threat. Trinidad and Tobago is not any threat to Iran, but just the perception is enough to cause a problem of national security to all Trinidadians and Tobagonians. So that is something that we have to also look at. Very important that we try not to say. There are times when we have things to say, but it's best to be quiet. And right now is a time that we should be quiet as leaders. As our leaders, they should be quiet in terms of whose side they are on. Shipping fines have begun to publish new price lists of different containers sizes. It doesn't look encouraging at all. These skyrocketing prices will be passed on to the ordinary consumer. And she's right. You're right, Marie. You're right. And I really wonder if we're really understanding what is happening. Again, we are the ones who are going to suffer, ladies and gentlemen. Trump is not. The military-industrial complex, Mark Rubio and his team will not. Even if one of them should die, they still will be the victor. I'm late, but good day. Good afternoon. Good day, Stephen. Welcome to the show. Yeah, sorry we didn't have you before when we're talking about the Caribbean is under threat. Iran and Cuba tensions could spark disaster. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I don't know what YouTube is doing in terms of distributing the videos. In my YouTube studios, the metrics are excellent, but the views, they're not sending out the videos. So I'm going to ask you to put the videos up, share them with as many people so that the algorithm will be forced to distribute the videos. That's the only way. There's no other way to let you know that's what is happening. And when you talk to them, there's nothing that can be solved. Philly is saying you're talking about the draft, right? The military draft. Yes, Philly. Yeah, they're thinking of reestablishing mandatory draft in the United States, and I'm wondering if in the Caribbean they would even think, if they don't have enough draft if they can't get enough people to go, if they will think of the Caribbean. And our governments will sell us out. You better believe it, right? Because they're getting births, right? The governments will sell you out, so they're not here to protect you. So you have to make sure you know all your laws, you know your rights, because at any given moment, the government can say that, a gentleman or whatever between the ages of 18 and whatever need to sign up. And they will make it sound like you're going to get benefits and good perks. And many young men who might feel that they're financially not well off could decide that they want to go. Okay? And we might have deaths, and that could be a period of mourning for people. We are the ones that is going to benefit from this war. Fertilizers and gas and oil products can't leave the Middle East, but it can leave. Yeah, and I agree with you that these things will be needed for the war. That I agree with you, Remembrance, sir. I do agree with that, but I'm saying, whose pocket will that profits go into? Will it go into the profits go into the coffers of the country, or into the coffers of these billionaires who are actually behind the wars in the first place? That's what I'm asking, right? Not that it's definitely they're going to need all of what you're saying, fertilizers and gas and oil. Yeah, they're going to need these things. But who will it benefit? Will it benefit the masses of Trinidad and Guyanese, or will it benefit only the government and the global elite, the domestic and global elites? That's my question. But you're right. I agree 100% with you. And that is how we need to think now. We can't think about economics and economics apart. We have to look at the geopolitical aspects and say, how is this tied and who is related to who benefits here and who benefits there, and that. But from a superficial logical perspective, yes, it seems like Trinidadian, the economy would boom because you're going to have demand, oil prices are going to go up. So therefore, the country would benefit from high gas and oil prices. But we're not seeing that in maybe in Trinidad, but we're not seeing that in Guyana. Guyana, which has grown its economy has grown by what? Last year, was it 30%? That the Guyanese economy grew by last year, and the majority of people are still suffering. Right? Every day you read the newspaper, they're talking about that the poverty gap has not been you know has not it has been widened, the gap between the rich and the poor, and things are getting more expensive. And we had Professor Hinson on this show, and he's Guyanese American, and he was telling us that the cost of property, and he is seasoned, well, he's now retired professor, and he wanted to go back home to live. And when he looked at the price of home in Guyana, he was saying that it's even out of his reach, right? So can you imagine the ordinary Guyanese? The cost of living has soared, and you'd think that this oil and gas boom in Guyana would have made life better for the people, but it didn't. It made life worse in some cases, but good for the domestic elites and for ExxonMobil and all of these companies. Yeah, they are laughing their way to the bank. But are the people of Guyana laughing their way to the bank? No. Right? Will the people of Trinidad? Well, Trinidad might be a different case because Trinidadians are, they're experienced in this oil business. They have the infrastructure. I think ExxonMobil had to go and build that infrastructure in Guyana. So it might be different. I'm not God, so I can't predict what is going to happen in Trinidad and Tobago. But I doubt it's going to be better for the people in Guyana. I doubt it, based on what we're seeing there at the moment. We have here, it's Philly saying it is actually a transfer of wealth, correct, from taxpayers to the oligarchs. Absolutely. The oligarchs get richer while taxpayers left with the bag, with the bag. Absolutely, with debt too. Debt around our necks, right? So this is where we are now, ladies and gentlemen. Economic loss. We might have draft in the Caribbean where the government will say that the U.S. needs, bodies to fight the war, right? And we have to be enlisted, right? So those of you who are in diaspora in the United States, your young men, young women, perhaps have to be enlisted too, have to be drafted for a war that they could have avoided. But this is where we are, okay? And we are not here to say who is going to win and who is going to lose, because it doesn't work like that. At the end of the day, we are the ones who are going to lose. We are the ones who generally lose. And we lose not only economically, we lose in terms of the erosion of our freedoms. And freedom cannot be bought or sold. All right? It has to be earned. It has to be fought for. Can't be bought. Remember, it's saying, if we're seeing a war about to take place, leaders in the Caribbean should not say no to war. They should be planning on how they can benefit from it. But we shouldn't want war, because war is the loss of lives, right? And if we, remembrancer, if we indirectly support them, the blood is going to be on our shoulders. Make no bones about it. Make no bones about it. If we indirectly, through the paying the taxes, well, some of the things we can't control because, we have to pay the government taxes anyway, right? But the things that we can control, if we deliberately, intentionally support them, because the price of oil is going to go up and our economy is going to benefit, that's selfishness, because you have to think about other humans whose lives are going to be lost. And in many cases, innocent human beings. Innocent human beings. So let's not just think economically, we have to think morally, socially, right? And as a people, we're losing morality. We don't know how to empathize with other human beings, knowing that right now a mother who is probably carrying a child, house is being bombed right now as we speak, and she's crying out or she's dead, right? People can't find food, starvation, dislocation, right? How would you feel if you know? We know how Trinidadians felt when we thought what could have been a deadly war in Venezuela, how the Trinidadians felt, and Tobagonians. It was scary. We know how we were scared. We didn't know what was going to happen. Thankfully, God spared us, and it was not something that went and could have devastated parts of Trinidad and Tobago. We thank God for that, but it could have been the unexpected, right? So we have to think. I think Trinidad and all of us in the region should be rethinking what we understand about war, because one came close to home, and if had it not been for God's mighty hand to move it back, we could have seen, loss of lives, terrible loss of lives, and destruction in the Caribbean region here. All right, so we sympathize with the Iranians, and our prayers should be with them, and we hope that the war stops immediately. Even if we have to eat bread and butter and drink some soup to go to bed, it's better to drink it and knowing that nobody, no human life has to go through the ordeal that many Iranians are going through right now. All right, we should not want our countries, because remember now, guys, we have a legacy of slavery in the Caribbean, and whites could say the same thing. Don't end slavery, because slavery was putting food on their table. Right? Don't end slavery. Let slavery continue. Right? But no, it had to stop, morally speaking, because they were human. We were human. Our foreparents were human beings. Okay, so we can't think now just in terms of getting the price of oil up so that it can benefit our economies. Whether Jamaican economy, where Jamaica doesn't have oil, but if it had, or Trinidad or Guyana, we can't think like that. We have to think, morally speaking, we want the war to end because people's lives are uprooted and are unnecessarily unalived. Yeah, so it's just very, very sad to know that we just become so, hardened, and we don't. The loss of human life is like nothing right now to us, because every day we hear so many people dying, so it just becomes something normal for people's lives to be snuffed out. Not understand that these are people's lives. So these are some of the things that are going to be affecting us. Yeah, so I think this is what we have to say. Do we want another live? When do we want to? Will you come tomorrow? Can we discuss? What do you want us to discuss tomorrow? Let us come back tomorrow and discuss another important issue. What would you like me to discuss tomorrow? Before we go, we're now wrapping up. What would you like to be discussed tomorrow? Quickly, guys. Okay, we don't have the type of control. Yes, let us do this one more. We don't have the type of control over our resources as most of us believe. Oil and gas, very good, David. I'm happy you're telling them that. Oil and gas products leaving TNT would not necessarily benefit Trinidad, especially in times of war. That's what I think too. What would you like us to discuss tomorrow? Anything? All right, I'll just have a live tomorrow, and we will discuss any topical issues, right, that might be presented to us on the live. Remember Mark Rubio, where I missed what you're saying here. Oh yeah, Mark Rubio's speech telling EU that colonization was good and we are trying to get back there. Correct. Let's discuss American acculturation. Yes, that would be a good. Yeah, let's discuss this topic tomorrow. And about everybody, yeah, this is going to be a good topic to discuss. Talk about anything. Yes. We could talk about anything and this. American acculturation, I think, is something that we need to look at. US has too acculturated to know any better. Right, we're too acculturated in American mode of thinking that we are now beginning to talk like Americans. They are, in fact, and I'm looking at some of the younger generation in the Caribbean, and they sound American, right? Because they're on TikTok and and on the social media platforms, so they don't even sound Caribbean anymore. They're on our TVs or radios, every movie, absolutely, every song, or newspapers, libraries, universities, social media, and they talk and they behave just like them. We don't know ourselves anymore. Let's talk about that tomorrow. It's a very important topic to speak about. Thank you very much, David. And thank you very much, everyone. And I'll see you tomorrow at what time is it better for you to come at on the live? 4, 5? What time? We'll come at 5. We'll come at 5 tomorrow again. Okay. All right. See you then. Have a great evening, and I'll talk back to you tomorrow. Bye bye.